Hey everybody, this is Eric Bond, the founder of BeatTheGMAT.com, and here again with another installment of our Write Like an Expert series. So for those of you who are new to the Write Like an Expert series, this is a new initiative by Beat the GMAT to invite top MBA experts to break down and analyze each essay in the best US business schools. And joining us today, we have Stacy Euler. Many of you in our community may be already familiar with Stacy. She is a very active forum contributor and expert. She serves as an MBA admissions expert for ClearAdmit. And a couple of words about Stacy before she begins her analysis of our school today, which is the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Some background on Stacy. So she actually served as the assistant director of admissions at Tuck from 2003 to 2005. So what a privilege. We have someone who's a true insider who's seen what admissions is like from the decision maker's seat. And she did a number of things with the Tuck program. Some things I'm seeing here is she really helps to increase the diversity in terms of gender and other initiatives like that while she was assistant director. And before that, Stacy was a leading recruiter for McKinsey & Company. So, Stacy, it's a real pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always good to be back.
Great. So, what's going to happen is we're going to switch to presentation mode in just a second, so stay with us. And then Stacy will lead the presentation to talk about and analyze each of the essays for the Tuck School of Business. So, stick around, and we'll be back in just a couple seconds. Hey everyone, this is Eric Bond again, and we're back with Stacy Euler, and Stacy is now going to kick off her presentation analyzing and breaking down each essay question for the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. So Stacy, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Eric, and thanks again for allowing me to host this today. I appreciate it. So what I want to talk about today, obviously, are the Tuck essays. I think it's probably on a lot of our minds given the upcoming deadline in a couple of weeks, or actually next week. And sort of fresh in my mind, I was actually up there over the weekend for a reunion and spent the weekend kind of catching up with some of my colleagues in admissions and actually being able to talk to them a lot about some of the changes going on at Tuck and the questions that they ask and the interview process and things that are maybe a little bit different from when I was there. But anyway, just to give you a little bit more information about me. So as Eric said, I work for ClearAdmit. This is my third season with the company. And prior to joining ClearAdmit, I was at McKinsey & Company where I led their MBA in Advanced Professional Degree Recruiting. I did that out of both Boston and San Francisco. And prior to that, I was Assistant Director of Admissions at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. So I do have over 9 years of experience in admissions and recruiting. Just to talk briefly a little bit about ClearAdmit. So ClearAdmit was actually one of the first companies to sort of come out in the consulting space. So we've been around for quite a while. It was formed by 2 Wharton grads with admissions experience. That's something that I think is really unique to our company is that every single one of us has served on an admissions committee at a top 10 school, Columbia, Wharton, Tuck. So that's something that we're pretty proud of. And we also have a pretty good pedigree with some interesting companies like McKinsey, Bain, and actually the NBA, National Basketball Association. So a lot of kind of unique work experience as well to sort of contribute. And then lastly, one more thing I'll say is that we're also affiliated with AGAC, which is essentially a professional organization that was actually co-founded by one of ClearAdmit's founders, Graham Richmond. And basically, being certified by AGAC basically means we uphold certain ethics and standards in the consulting field. So that's a little bit about ClearAdmit. 2 more things I actually do want to touch on. One thing that we're pretty proud of that we rolled out last year is an iPhone application. And it's great, it's free, and it helps you track your progress towards your deadlines and research programs. I definitely recommend checking that out. And then our publications, in particular our Tuck School Guide and our Tuck Interview Guide, can be really helpful as you're researching the school and preparing for your interview. Since it is an applicant-initiated interview, that's something that everybody is required to do, so really preparing for that in advance can be pretty helpful. But let's get right into what we're actually here to talk about today. So the Tuck essays. There's 4 essays for Tuck. They're kind of keeping the same themes that they've had for the last several years. Actually, 2 of the essays I helped create when I was actually in admissions, so it's nice to see they're still sticking around. But they are keeping some of the same themes. They've changed 2 essays this year just slightly. But for the most part, the focus is still on teamwork, it's on leadership, it's on your unique characteristics and contributions to the community. So let's go into the first essay here. first essay, why is an MBA a critical next step towards your short and long-term career goals? Why is Tuck the best MBA program for you? So really straightforward career goals essay. Pretty much, what are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? It's really important that you're as explicit as possible in this. I can tell you from firsthand experience, we've always had a very similar career goals essay here. And if an applicant failed to clearly define their goals and really say, this is what I've been doing, this is why I need the MBA, this is my short-term goal, this is my long-term goal, this is how the MBA is going to sort of help bridge that gap or connect the dots. If they failed to do that, it was a pretty easy way for us to say, oh, vague goals, they don't really know why they need an MBA, why should we give them a spot? So this actually is a pretty critical essay. Not that they aren't all critical, but I think this is one where you really can't afford to mess up. So really thinking about your goals. What do you truly need the MBA for? And then really the next important component is why Tuck? And this is a school that you'll find is actually really sensitive to this. They really want to know, why do you want to go there? They're such a small campus. They're in, Hanover, New Hampshire, really tiny town, and they really want to know that you understand their community, that you're going to appreciate being there, you're going to have a unique contribution, that you really understand the program. So doing your research is critical. And clearly, you do have to visit to do your interview if you're in the U.S. If you're international, it's different. But when you visit, try and schedule it so that your visit for your interview is before you submit your applications, because this is a great way for you to do some research, to sit in on some classes, to talk to current students, to find out about some clubs and initiatives, things on campus that you can really help use to sort of tailor and customize this essay, because the why Tuck piece is just as important, if not more so, as being really explicit in your goals. So as you can see, all three of my bullet points keep talking about research, clearly defining your goals, being really straightforward, really explicit. So that's basically the gist of this essay. But again, check out our Clear Event School Guide. It might really help you with your research and make it a little bit easier to put this together. Let's go to the second essay. This is a new essay. This is discuss your most meaningful leadership experience. What did you learn about your own individual strengths and weaknesses through this experience? So this really does show the emphasis that Tuck is putting on leadership. I think that it's always been known as a program that really embraces teamwork. Given the small community, given the small class sections, the study groups that you're put in from the first day of class, teamwork is really sort of integral in the experience. But I think that they're emphasizing even more than ever that they really do put out a lot of great leaders, and they really do want to emphasize that having strong leadership skills when you get there is pretty critical, and that they want to help you hone these skills. So talking about your most meaningful leadership experience, what did you learn? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? I personally hate strengths and weaknesses questions. I think that a lot of times people use sort of veiled strengths as their weakness, and that just doesn't work for this essay. You really do want to be honest. Obviously, you want to be honest, but you don't want to be negative. You always want to maintain a positive tone, but don't try and sort of use a veiled strength and make it look like a weakness. Really be honest there, accept responsibility, show where you need to develop. I think that's really important. So the first step, obviously, in tackling this essay is just truly outlining the experience that you had. How did your efforts inspire others? And how did your efforts impact the bottom line in the organization? This experience, I think, is important to note. It doesn't have to have taken place in the workplace. It certainly could be in an extracurricular activity. I think a lot of people, just sort of given the nature of their job or their role, don't really have an opportunity to step up and lead at this point in their career. So a lot of times leadership experiences truly do come from extracurricular activities. So it's perfectly fine if this is an extracurricular activity example, and actually it could serve you well if it is, because it's probably going to be a little bit more unique and maybe actually even easier to follow than trying to sort of explain a whole organizational structure in your company. So anyway, I digress. So clearly outline the experience, explain how it inspired others, how did it really impact the organization's bottom line. So really trying to show why this is meaningful. Reflect on the process that you went through and the personal development that you gained through this experience. And again, be positive in the whole essay, because everybody does have weaknesses, and that's part of why you need to go to business school, right? Is to really help develop those areas, those weaker areas, so that they're strengths by the time that you leave. So that is the gist of essay 2. moving down to essay 3, we're kind of cranking through these, but I do want to leave a lot of time at the end for some questions and some specific examples if need be. So essay 3, this one's been around for a little while. Oh, I'm sorry, no, this one's new, pardon me. What is the greatest challenge or hurdle you have overcome, either personally or professionally, and how did you manage to do so? Okay, this kind of really shows, again, Tuck is a small community, right? I mean, I think their target class size now is about 265, 270, really small. They really want to know that each person is unique and interesting and is adding value. When they're reading these applications, they're literally thinking, is this somebody, if I were a student, that I would want to sit next to in class, right? So keeping that in mind, it is sort of that airplane test is, does somebody want to get stuck next to on an airplane? Keeping that in mind throughout all of your essays, you really do want to show a personal side. You really don't want to just sort of answer the question and be vague or use a weak example. It really does ask you to kind of dig deep here and really pick something that's pretty intense. I'm not saying it has to be overly dramatic or anything like that, but I think actually digging deep and finding a really solid experience is going to be important for this essay to be successful. I think the hardest thing that happens is that oftentimes people feel that they're perhaps getting a little too personal in their essays, but in this particular instance and for this particular program, I think that getting a little bit personal is actually really important. They really do want to know who you are. Again, they don't have a lot of seats to give up, so they really want to be sure that they know who you are and they understand why you should get one. So for this essay, you can use a personal or a professional example. I think it's important that you do strike a balance in your essays. You don't want to just use all work examples and then not show any of your sort of personal side, but then at the same time, you don't want to just use all personal examples and then look like you're avoiding work-related examples. So really strike a balance. So if in the essay before you wrote about something personal, maybe this one is professional. Think about how you want to sort of approach these and attack them so that you are demonstrating a balance. I think oftentimes this one does tend to be a personal example because I think a lot of times there are a lot of personal challenges and hurdles, and sort of the outcome of those and the way that you succeed and overcome them actually can affect your professional life as well. One of the things that I always recommend, and this is sort of the same advice for a mistake essay, don't use a recent example. Meaning something that happened in the last year or maybe even 2 years, probably not really a good idea. The problem with using a recent example is that it can appear that perhaps you haven't really had the opportunity to overcome this and to really demonstrate what you've learned from it. It's a little bit harder to convince the outcome of that, to convince them that perhaps you won't make this same sort of challenge or hurdle again and maybe don't know how to approach it if it happens again. So I usually recommend going about 3 years back. At the same time, I caution you from going back to high school or college because I think that just reflects who you were then. And I think it's really fair to say that who you are when you're 18 is really different than who you are when you're 25, right? So strike a balance there. Pick something that's meaningful, but without digging too deep and then without staying too recent too, because again, you don't want them to think you really haven't learned your lesson yet or really haven't been able to apply what you've taken away from this experience. And then the last thing is just provide a comprehensive picture of personal and professional development through your narrative. Be really explicit here. I mean, obviously the first thing you want to talk about straight out of the gate is the challenge or the hurdles, but then you really want to be sure that you leave enough room in this essay to go into how you sort of grew from this and how you managed to do so. So be sure that sort of no stone is left unturned here, that you're not spending too much of the essay actually talking about the hurdle and not enough of the time talking about the growth and the experience that you got as a result of this. So let's go ahead and move on to the fourth essay. So essay 4, Tuck seeks candidates of various backgrounds who can bring new perspectives to our community. How will your unique personal history, values, and or life experiences contribute to the culture at Tuck? Again, they're all about their community, right? It's pretty important to them. And having, again, just been there over the weekend and been part of that community again, I truly see that, and I actually think that's one of the biggest values that the school has, is their tight and close-knit community. So back to this. Research is critical. I think I'm saying that on every single one of these essays practically, but it really is. Do your homework, visit the school, engage with students if you can't get there. Find ways to communicate with club leaders through email or phone calls or Skype. Go to, if Tuck's doing a reception in your area, go. Really make an effort to meet people, to engage with alums in your community, in your office, however you can, because the more you learn about this, the more you're going to really be able to understand how you can contribute to their community. Again, I think this really comes down to what differentiates you from others in the pool. And I can honestly tell you, there were days when I would sit there and I'd be reading applications, and I'd read about 12 applications a day, and 10 of them would all be from the same industry and maybe went to very similar schools and had similar jobs and, frankly, pretty darn similar examples in their essays. And I think that obviously, I think regardless of your industry or even your job or your function, it's pretty easy to end up using the same examples in your essay. I mean, everybody can tell a story about staying up till 4 a.m. to meet a deadline or a meeting with a client that didn't go well. And frankly, those aren't really necessarily that compelling, and they don't really help you differentiate yourself. You're not distinctive when you use those examples. So this is an opportunity to be distinctive, to differentiate yourself from others in the pool. Because back to those days when I was reading applications, I felt like sometimes I could have just thrown a dart and picked one that way, because everybody just seemed pretty darn similar and had similar test scores, similar GPAs, and similar work experience. And frankly, I didn't want to pick anyone. So don't be that person. Use your experience, use your research to really show how you're going to contribute to this culture. What clubs are you going to join? What clubs do you want to start that they don't have? Really do a lot of research here, and you'll be able to put together a really successful essay. So I kind of sped through those, but I think that that's okay, because I really do want to have a lot of time here at the end for Q&A. Just want to touch on ClearAdmit again. We do have a lot of great resources, from our iPhone app to all of our publications. We were one of the first in the industry to really start doing publications, and we've been doing them for years. And we actually have so many relationships with admissions committees that we actually get them to sort of fact check our school guides for us and really help give us feedback. So they're pretty accurate, or they're very accurate, and I think that they're really great tools when you're trying to do your research on all these programs, especially if you can't get there to visit. So check out our guides, check out our interview guides as well, and if you want a free assessment of your candidacy, just feel free to send an email to me, and we'll schedule some time to get on the phone and kind of figure out what you're looking for in your profile and how that might fit with some of the programs out there. So, Eric, I think that is it for me on the slides. Do you want to go into Q&A?
Yeah, that sounds great. So for those of you who are just joining us, we've been listening to Stacy Euler, who is an MBA admissions expert with ClearAdmit. And she has just gone through and analyzed and broke down each of the admissions essays for this year's Tuck School of Business application. So we're going to be coming back in just a few seconds, and now's the time to ask your questions. Again, Stacy is a former assistant director of admissions at Tuck, so great opportunity to get your questions answered live by an insider. So stick around, and we'll be back in just a few seconds with the Q&A. Hey folks, we're back. Now is the time to ask your questions about the Tuck School of Business application, and we're speaking with Stacy Euler, so she'll be taking your questions right now. The first question that I'm seeing is a question from Subir on Facebook, and Subir asks, what would be the best way to articulate career change into your essays? Any suggestions on how you can weave that story of career change in the Tuck application?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's important to remember that people go to business school for one or two reasons, right? It's either to change careers or to advance to another level in their current career. So this isn't something new. This isn't something that the admissions committee isn't used to seeing, but I do think it's important. And usually when you're changing careers and you have something different that you want to do, there's a reason that you want to do that. There's something that's interested you in this industry or inspired you, or maybe there's a personal connection to it. So it's really being able to illustrate that so that it doesn't look like this career change is out of left field. You don't want to be someone who's been, in IT and then suddenly says, oh, I want to be an investment banker, and you don't really have a leg to stand on other than that just sounds like a really cool, sexy career where you can make a lot of money. So So finding ways to kind of connect it to something like maybe you had an opportunity in your job to do some finance things that you hadn't been able to do before, and it kind of got the finance bug, or finding something to sort of personalize where the interest is coming from is really critical, rather than just saying, I think this would be a really great job and I'd like to do it, but I don't know how, so I need to take these classes. I mean, to some extent that is the case, but you really do want to show a connection to it, and not just that you kind of woke up one day and thought it sounded really cool. So again, kind of do your research, maybe talk about some firms that sound interesting to you in the industry that you want to go into, because that will show, one, you've done your research, and two, that you sort of realize where your fit might be within that new industry. So that's the best way, I think, to go about illustrating it, is just to really tie it back into some sort of personal connection, and not just some sort of epiphany that you had one day when you woke up.
And are there things that Subir can do maybe outside of his essays or the story itself with perhaps extracurriculars? One tip I've heard before is, let's say that you're doing a career change. I'll just give an example. Let's say that you're given a career change from a computer programming industry to being a marketer in the Metropolitan Opera. Maybe there are things that he can show in his extracurriculars that show his penchant, I guess, for the arts. This is a real example too. I have a friend who is going through this right now. But maybe there. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like we lost the video feed. But Stacey, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. As we sort of get this back going, any thoughts though on how the extracurriculars or other aspects of your application can sort of help Subir as he makes that career change story?
Absolutely. So I think that you're right, and you reminded me your example of a client that I've worked with that is coming from sort of a consulting background and wants to go into fine arts as well, and she actually has a real demonstrated passion in that she's involved in her extracurricular activities in different opera organizations, and I think she's actually even on a board, and she's just really been involved in it, and it's a personal passion. So again, that's not sort of a left field decision for her. It's something that she ultimately decided, I want to pursue what I enjoy, right? And so she kind of went down that path, and I think because of that, she's got a really great story to tell and a lot of sort of supporting evidence that this is the industry for her. So I think that's very true. So if you're interested in something in particular, extracurriculars are a really great way to show that you're interested, and also to maybe get some hands-on experience in the industry if you haven't had any before. And then also sort of, this is a little bit of a segue, but I think that's really important as far as a lot of people unfortunately don't have jobs right now who are applying to business school due to sort of economic constraints and things like that. And if you don't have a job and you want to go get your MBA, it's a really great time for you to sort of maybe go and find some extracurricular activities and things to do that are along the lines of what you want to do after you get your MBA. It's a great way to show that you're making good use of your time, and also to perhaps learn about a new industry and maybe get some leadership and teamwork experience in there as well. So I highly recommend that should someone find themselves in that situation. Great.
We are speaking with Stacey Euler with ClearMit. We're still working on the video component, but you can still ask your questions. We have her on the phone, so we'll just keep continuing. So I see another question coming in actually about essay number 3. And this is one essay, one of your tips actually triggered me as well, because you had mentioned that for essay number 3, and just to refresh people's memories, it was about overcoming your greatest challenge or obstacle. You specifically cited that it's not recommended to use a recent example. And I found that to be a fascinating piece of advice, because for those audience members who have seen previous sessions, there have been multiple occasions where admissions experts have said, really focus on your experiences in the last 3 years and pull those in as examples. So this was certainly counter to, I think, my intuition of how to approach that essay. And my long-winded exposition leads me to this next question, which is, how far back is appropriate? Can you talk a little bit more about, how far into the past is appropriate to pull from examples?
Absolutely. So I think that's a really good question, and you're right. I mean, for the most part, you shouldn't be talking about things that happened more than a handful of years ago. I mean, even MIT Sloan actually said, please don't use any examples from more than 3 years ago.
That's right.
Some schools come right out and say it, others sort of implied, and they hope that you just kind of get it. So I think that in this situation, and I really truly think this is the same for a mistake and failure essay, is if you use something that's in your too recent career history or personal history, it truly is hard to demonstrate that you've had an opportunity to use what you've learned from the situation. If you overcame something here, have you really had a chance to prove it? Have you been up against that same similar scenario again, and have you really had that opportunity? Because if it happened 3 months ago, really, truly, I'm going to have a hard time believing that something very similar has already happened again, and you've had that chance to apply what you've learned. So going back is a little bit more important. I kind of said a year. I wouldn't use anything more recent than a year. I think 1 to 3 years is probably good. I tend to advise my clients on this to try and pick something from maybe the beginning of their career, so the first 1 or 2 years they've been working, and most of them, having 3 to 4 years of work experience. The first one to 2 years of work, really, that's all about learning, right, and trying to figure out just what you're expected to do every day and trying to grow and get ahead. And so there's a lot of sort of missteps along the way, and it's not really uncommon to have a big hurdle to overcome that early on in your career. And then now you're at the point where suddenly, wow, I think I'm ready for business school. Well, that means you're at this really big turning point in your career. Hence, you've had an opportunity to really learn from a lot of mistakes, from hurdles and things in your past. So I digress, I'm sort of rambling here. But what I'm trying to say is pick something within the first 1 to 2 years of your career. If you've been working longer than 5, 6, 7 years, then that's probably too far back. I think the general rule of thumb then would be to do something that would be more along the lines of within the last 3 years, I guess is probably the best way to put it. It sort of depends, again, how long you've been in the industry, how long you've been working, but nothing within the last year if possible. I think one caveat here is you don't want to pick a weak example just so that you have a longer time frame. I think a lot of people think that, like, oh, well, the biggest mistake I ever made was 3 months ago, but I can't tell them that, so I'll pick this subpar one from 3 years ago, just so it's not as old. So don't do yourself a disservice by picking something that's a lesser example, just to pick a longer time frame, if that makes sense.
Great advice. And we have Stacy back on video as well, so we're both audio and visual capable right now. Another question. I'm seeing a number of great questions coming in. I'm glad that we left a lot of time for the Q&A. I see another question. I get this all the time, and I'm sure you do too in the forums. So this person's asking, can you give me an example of how someone can distinguish himself or herself, even if their background, especially when their background is typical? So for the world of, iBankers, consultants, IT professionals, what other sort of approaches and advice can you provide to sort of help that typical background?
That's a great question, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying when I would read applications, and everyone would start to sound the same, right? And it was really hard to pick someone, if everybody has similar GMAT scores, which for most people coming from certain industries, there is sort of an average for iBankers, right? And consultants kind of have a range, and IT professionals, and they obviously, consultants and bankers and other professionals have these great jobs because they did well in school, so they have similar educational experiences as well. And so there are a lot of similarities. So it absolutely does come down to, for the most part, your life outside of the office. And I know that that's really a challenge when you're a consultant or you're a banker or you're in an industry where your job is so demanding that you don't actually have a lot of time outside the office. But I think where a lot of people get confused is that they feel like I don't have any volunteer work. My extracurricular activities don't involve, going to serve meals to the homeless every Saturday. And I think that that's really important to remember that that's okay. You don't have to have this long laundry list of volunteer experiences and activities in order to be an interesting person. Sometimes the best stories come from your own personal experiences. Perhaps you're just an avid hiker, right? And you've climbed, 5 of the highest peaks in North America or something like that. And you've got this interesting experience that's very personal to you, totally outside of the workplace. That's what they care about. So it doesn't mean you have to be walking dogs every Saturday at the shelter or feeding the homeless. If you have something that you're really proud of and passionate about, that's so much more interesting. I would much rather read an essay about somebody who, went hiking one weekend by themselves and twisted their ankle and didn't have a cell phone, and it took them 3 days to climb down the mountain, right? And they persevered and they showed leadership or whatever it may be. I'm going to remember that story. As an admissions committee member, I'm going to remember that story. This is the guy who, had that crazy hiking experience. So don't think you have to go save the world or feed the animals or feed people on the weekends to be unique. Find things that you truly enjoy, because honestly, those are the things you're going to want to engage in on campus. Those are the things you're going to bring to the community, right? If you absolutely love wine tasting, maybe there's a wine tasting club. If not, maybe you can start one, right? Or you love foreign films and you like to cook the food to go with the theme of the movie. Maybe you start that kind of club. These sound quirky and they sound weird, but I think everybody has something kind of interesting that they enjoy doing on a personal level. And think about that. I mean, that's what you'd want to do in business school. So why not tell them?
It seems that for Dartmouth, it more so than any other application that I've seen within the top school bracket, Tuck seems to really care about that personal fit. And so what I'm reading between the lines, or actually what you've explicitly said many times even, is that the personal side of just who that applicant is and whether this person will actually just fit within the unique culture is so important. So it sounds it sounds like when I talk to my friends about Tuck, that emphasizing that the personal aspect and just who you are as a person, even more so than what perhaps is traditionally thought of as the appropriate way to present yourself in a business school application. Like, here are my achievements, here is my leadership within the workplace. Tuck seems to have a lot of ample opportunities for showing that personal side, and that's where I guess you differentiate yourself, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it truly is, and I remember that. So not to get too personal, but my husband went to Tuck, which was the reason that I moved there and was able to get this fantastic job in admissions. But I remember going to the Admitted Students Weekend with him years ago, and all these admissions officers ran up when they saw his name tag and said, "You're the ferry boat driver." And I thought, well, that's so weird. Why would they remember that one thing about him, that he drove a ferry every summer through high school and college, right? Why would they remember that? But then actually getting a chance to wear that hat, that's exactly why they remembered that, right? Because, yes, he's a white male consultant with a 750 GMAT. Those are kind of a dime a dozen, but he drove a ferry. Who else did that, right? and that's how he stood out. And that's the same stuff I tell my clients. It's like, it's that quirky thing that, you could line you up with everybody else in the industry and you're all kind of similar credentials, but you drive a ferry, or you've hiked, 5 highest peaks in North America, or you're an avid kayaker, right? Something like that really matters to them. And they truly, being in these decision meetings, we would, pull out the file to talk about somebody, and we'd say, oh, this is the guy that, that learned how to be a pilot. Oh, he's so cool. And then suddenly you're excited about the person and you're talking about them because you've found a personal connection to them, not just, oh, this is a 750 white male consultant who will do well, right? That's great, but that's a lot of people applying to business school, right? So It really does matter to them. And I like to think that almost everybody I ever admitted, there was a reason like that they drove a ferry, or that they started their own knitting company on the side, or something quirky, but something memorable and deeply personal.
So, word of advice to the Beat the GMAT audience: the ferry boat angle has already been taken for Tuck. So think of your own sort of angle. Let's go back to some more questions here. I see a question coming in from Twitter from Meyer Sally, and this person is asking, do you see any themes or categories within successful differentiators for essay number 4? Can you remind us what essay number 4 is, and then maybe we can discuss Meyer Sally's question a little bit more?
Yeah, so essay number 4 is the candidates of various backgrounds. You can bring a unique perspective to the community. How your unique personal history and values and life experiences contribute to the culture. That's essay 4. And can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
This question it's sort of actually it actually touched on stuff that we'd already discussed a little bit, but it says any themes or categories that you've seen as being successful for that essay. So just a little bit more even elaboration on that.
Yeah, so this one, I truly think you really have to do your research to do this essay well. You have to know the programs that Tuck offers. I'm not talking about knowing the curriculum by any means or the courses, but knowing the clubs that they offer and knowing the different opportunities to be involved, right? Perhaps you're an entrepreneur and they've got an entrepreneurship club, but you've got this whole new bent on it, right? On something that you've done that you think is really new and unique, or something where you can really contribute, or maybe it's a personal interest club. Tuck has hockey, and you were a hockey player for 15 years, and you want to play hockey for them, or you've never played and you want to be a tripod, or it's really doing your research and understanding what do they have to offer and how do you fit in with that. It's one thing to say you're going to join a club, but really, what are you going to contribute to that club? What are people going to get out of you going to those meetings every week? That's what really matters. Just being a member isn't really good enough. And I would say I think that's very fair for every business school. Just saying you want to join a bunch of clubs doesn't really mean anything because these clubs are run by students. And so you need to figure out how you're going to help keep this thing running, right? How you're going to contribute. Or you're going to start a club because it doesn't exist yet, but you've got something that you're so passionate about that you think others would really want to participate in and enjoy as well. So having a very deep knowledge of the community and what it has to offer and how you fit in with that is really critical. Again, do your research. Don't regurgitate their marketing materials. There's nothing worse than reading, I'm attracted to the close-knit community, and basically people love to sort of verbatim say what Tuck's telling you about themselves. Don't do that. Dig deeper. That's the only way you can make this a successful essay is to dig deeper and just figure out where you fit in.
So we're speaking with Stacy Euler. She is an MBA admissions expert with ClearAdmit, and she is currently taking your questions live about the Tuck School of Business. I see two questions coming in with regard to GPA. Both are, how do I approach low GPA potentially in my optional essays? Any advice on strategies for approaching low GPAs?
So I think the first and foremost important thing when we're talking about low GPA is that's in your past, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't go back and change your GPA. It is what it is. When you're approaching it in the optional essay, which you absolutely should, so I'm glad that you're planning on doing that, as it's anything in your application that you think is a red flag, it's always so much better to write an optional essay and give them your interpretation and explanation of what happened rather than allowing them to come up with their own or to think that you don't care. If you have a 2.6 GPA and you don't talk about an optional essay, that could send a message that you actually don't think it's that bad, right? So talking about it in the optional essay is really important, and I'm glad you brought this up. However, the essay should be really brief. Anytime you're writing an optional essay, you're essentially asking for someone to spend more time on your application than anybody else's, right? So if you're asking for more time, then you really need to be respectful of that and be really brief. I usually say no more than 250 words, if at all possible. And again, this is an explanation, not an excuse, right? So remember that when you're writing this essay, you're not making excuses for this low GPA. You're explaining it. Maybe you were working full time and that was really hard to balance, right? And there's a lot of respect for people who work full time when they're in school, and sort of that bootstrapper mentality that your education means enough to you that you're willing to pay for it, right? And work hard to get it. So whatever it may be, if you've goofed off your freshman and sophomore year, you just flat out have to take accountability for that and responsibility and say it, right? Again, not making excuses, but just being really honest. I would much rather read someone saying, I didn't take school seriously my first 2 years. I partied too hard or whatever it may be, and own up to that than just be like, oh, I had no idea what I was in for, and oops, I messed up. Really explain yourself, but again, don't make excuses. Provide an explanation and keep it brief. It's in the past, and have a killer GMAT. And if you don't have a killer GMAT, take some extra courses. Show them that you're going to be capable when you get there, because the fear of admitting somebody with a low GPA is that they're not going to do well, and then the outcome's going to have professors beating down their door angry with them because they've admitted people who weren't sort of at the school's average level and are dragging the rest of the class down. So let them know you're not going to be that person, right? Whether it's through courses or through a great GMAT or through a pretty amazing career trajectory and experience.
So, going along with your tip about, explaining yourself succinctly, less than 250 words, I did have a question for you, a personal question about word limits. So when you're sitting on the admissions committee and plowing through countless numbers of essays, was word limits something that you were very, very careful about monitoring? Did you slap people on the wrist if they went over, a little bit over, or just wanted to get your thoughts as an insider?
That's a good question, because Tuck in particular doesn't actually give you word limits anymore. It did when I was there, and now they kind of give suggestions, which is usually about 500 words if you look at it and look at our blog, and we kind of talk about that too. So word limit, there's a lot. This is one of the questions I get from clients a lot. The general rule of thumb is plus or minus 10%, right? So a 500-word essay, you could go up to 550.
Right.
But, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, please go on.
Okay, so, but honestly, when it comes down to it, the way these applications are done, and unfortunately it's not the most eco-friendly way, they're printed out. And so you're getting this big folder. At first it's the data forms, and then it's the resume, and then the essays, and then the recommendations, and the tucks, and the interview, right? So you're getting this sort of packet that you're reading through. And I can tell you that word number or word count does not print on the bottom of it. So it's not like I open essay 1 and go, oh, we wanted 500 words, and this is 723. You don't know that for sure, but I can tell you when this is all you're doing every day for months, you know how long that essay should be based on feel. Like, oh, essay 1's a 1-page essay. This person wrote 3, right? So it's more of you kind of get a feel for it. So it's okay if they go over by a paragraph or a few sentences or a half a page. But if you're going to do that, you better have something valuable to say. Because there's nothing worse than somebody who suddenly felt compelled to write a 1,000-word essay when we suggested 500, and they wasted an extra, 5-10 minutes of my time because, frankly, they couldn't just cut to the point, right? So it's okay to go over, guess what I'm trying to say, but if you do, be sure that you're actually adding value by what you're saying and that you're not just rambling on, because then that does sort of annoy them.
Right.
And I'll actually tell you from experience, when I read an essay and it got to be apparent that it was going to be extremely long, and I'm getting into the story and it should be almost done and we're still kind of doing the intro, I'd look ahead and go, oh my gosh, there's 2 more pages, and I wouldn't finish reading it. So my time was too valuable to sit there and spend 3 pages on an essay that should have been 1 page. Remember that and respect their time.
Great. I see going back into actually specifically the Tuck essays, I see a question from Martin from Facebook. Martin's asking, how would you separate essay number 2 and essay number 3? Because sometimes great leadership involves a great challenge.
Very good point. So let's recap. So essay 2 is discuss your most meaningful leadership experience. And essay 3 is what is the greatest challenge or hurdle that you've had to overcome. So this sort of goes back to a question that I get quite a bit. And oftentimes there's one particular experience that's really defined you at work. There's something really big, a project that you worked on, or some sort of experience that's really sort of been a defining moment in your career, whether it was a challenge or a failure or something, but it's really sort of shaped the way you perform. And so I have clients who want to sort of draw from that one experience over a couple of essays, 1 or 2 essays, I guess 2 essays, that would be my point here. That's okay. Again, this sort of goes back to my tips before, and that it's so much better to sort of use the same experience and draw from it for 2 essays than to come up with a subpar example just to tell a different story, right? It's truly, at the end of the day, you feel like your best example for both of those essays comes from one experience, then by all means, use that. That's absolutely fine. It's so much better than to say, well, I can't repeat myself, so I'll pick something that's really not that great, but it's different. So at the end of the day, if that's the most sort of profound experience you've had, there's nothing wrong with talking about it again, right? And chances are you're probably going to talk about it in your interview too. So that's okay. Just be consistent when you talk about it. Don't be overly repetitive. If you talked about it in essay 2, then don't reintroduce the whole story all over again in essay 3 because I just read essay 2, right? So you can sort of, in some ways, pick up where you left off and just sort of talk about the different angle or piece that's relevant to that essay. But it's okay to use the same example if it truly is the best example.
So I love that response, Stacey, because it's actually triggered a philosophical point that I always try to make, and I think many of us try to make as professionals in this industry about recycling essays. One of the dangers about recycling is that the principles by which some things are acceptable for one school don't always apply to another school. So for those of you who have seen previous sessions, we've heard several consultants say, never use the same example across multiple essays, and they had their reasons why they believe that. And for some schools, I think that there may be some sort of cultural principle behind why, using the same example for multiple questions is bad. But in the case of Tuck, for those of you who do your research and are here today, hearing it straight from Stacey, it's okay in certain cases if that's the most compelling point, a compelling example of experience that you had to use that across multiple essays. Now, that being said, Stacey, I just would love to draw you into your perspective about recycling essays and what you think, what you recommend for applicants who are applying to multiple schools, because there are some themes that overlap, but in this case, it's just a clear example that Tuck has one sort of way of doing things and accepting certain principles versus another school.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Eric. And I'm not one that's advocating recycling by any means, but I truly do think that if there's one experience where you feel like two great examples come from it, it's okay. It's granted not ideal, but it really does go back to don't pick a lesser example just to be different. You don't want to appear that you've only ever had one experience at work and that's all you can talk about. And that's something that if you do choose to use the same example, that the outcome might start to perceive. So keep that in mind, because you don't want them to think, wow, this person's only been out for 2 years and they keep referring to the same example. Maybe they just don't have enough experience, right? So I do caution you, if you are going to use it, be careful how you use it, and it better be a pretty darn good example, right? To feel like it's worthy of getting the attention in 2 essays, right? It's got to be pretty major, not just a typo on a memo, right? It needs to be something pretty intense. I agree, though. There's some schools you cannot do that. Like, Wharton and Harvard, you've got a mistake essay and a failure essay. Those are 2 very different essays, and I feel like every single one of my clients tries to make the mistake work for the failure. And really, sometimes it's honestly coming back to, okay, really, what's a mistake and what's a failure? Let's define these 2. Do you see how they're different? Schools will know. They know what other schools' essay topics are. They look at them when they're crafting their own. And that's a big part of how they decide what to write. It's because they want it. Everyone wants to capture sort of the same themes of leadership and teamwork, obviously, but they want to do it in a way where you can't just copy and paste and you find and replace Kellogg with Tuck, right? So they know what the other schools are asking, and if they read your essay and it sounds like a Harvard essay or a Wharton essay or a Kellogg essay, they're going to know that, and they're going to make a note of that. And to them, that means that this perhaps isn't your top choice, that you couldn't bother to give fresh material for them, right? I can tell you there were many times I would read an essay where they did find and replace, but they forgot to do it in the last sentence, and so it still said Kellogg. So to me, I was just like, wow, I would have really liked to have this person, but clearly they lack attention to detail, and they don't want to be here bad enough to give me a new essay. So see ya, right? So remember, that's important too. So you can sort of use the same ideas and experiences throughout your essays, and I think that there's a lot of, when you write a mistake essay, perhaps there is a failure that came out of that, but I wouldn't suggest recycling it. Again, it's sort of taking the failure component out of that. So you're not necessarily starting from scratch, but you are still crafting a new essay, and I think that's really important.
Great response. And actually, Martin just chimed in and said, excellent, thank you for that response. So you're welcome, Martin. We are speaking with Stacy Euler, MBA admissions expert with Clear Admits, and I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I see a question from Rao Suman, as well as, let's see, oh yes, okay. So this question, and actually I've seen this in many forums, is it absolutely necessary to initiate an interview? And does it hurt the applicant if you don't?
That is a great question. And so this is something that I actually sat down with Pat Harrison, who's an associate director of admissions, over the weekend and talked to her about when I was up in Hanover, because the rules have sort of changed over the years. When I was there, when we'd go to New York, we'd offer a handful of interviews, and when we traveled around, we would do that. And then my second year there, we decided not to do that, because if you live in New York and you can't get up to Hanover for the day, then clearly you don't want it bad enough, right? So it sort of changed over time. And that if you really want to interview, then you really need to make it happen. There is an exception there for international students. There isn't an expectation that if you live in India that you come to Hanover, because that's frankly a little bit ridiculous and expensive and very time-consuming. And so when they travel in Europe and Asia, Southeast Asia, they do conduct interviews. However, they've kind of cut back on their travel schedule this year. They're not quite going to as many countries as they did before. For sort of various reasons. And so they're doing a lot of Skype interviews for international candidates.
Oh, wow.
Because, again, expecting them to come. But they will reach out to you for that. So frankly, if you're from India and you want to interview and you know you can't get there, you don't need to call them and tell them that. They're going to reach out to you if they want to talk to you. So they will schedule that and make that happen, or they'll find an alum, or they'll do Skype. So they will do that. But if you're in Boston or you're in New York or pretty much anywhere west of the Mississippi, or east of the Mississippi, then you need to go. By not going, it sends a signal that you're not interested. One thing I want to note about that is when I was talking to Pat Harrison about this particular issue, I said, I actually have a few friends and clients who are applying to Tuck that live in California, and frankly, all you have are Wednesdays at 10 a.m., and that's really hard to do for someone from California, because even if they take a red eye and they get there 8 in the morning, they can't get to Hanover from Boston in enough time to make that interview. So for California and West Coast people, what's the expectation there, right? Because clearly they're interested, but then should they really have to take off several days of work to make this happen when someone from New York only has to take off several hours, right? So she said that they've noticed that there's been a lot of interest this year in interviews and that there's been a big wait list for interviews, and so they're thinking about adding an extra couple of weeks after the deadline, because the idea is you need to interview before the deadline. They're talking about it right now, about adding an extra couple of weeks to that for both the early decision and the early action in the round one. But it's not set in stone yet. So my advice is, if you're one of those people out there who's trying to get a Tuck interview but it's not working with your schedule, look at the admissions website every day for that announcement. I don't know if they're going to announce it via email or on the website about the extension, but just be on top of it so that when they open it up, you can actually get a date. I think that's really important. And if you can't get a date that works for you, get on a wait list, because then it just shows that you made an effort to try and get there, even if it didn't pan out.
Rohit, I'm sorry. I see a follow-up message coming in from Rohit, who had actually was the other person who asked the same question. And he's asking, so how can we show a deeper commitment to Tuck without a campus visit and an interview? Are there other sort of strategies, I guess, to demonstrate that?
Absolutely, and I think that this is a fair question for a lot of schools. I think, Columbia, they really want to know that you want to be there. They're extremely sensitive to it, and other schools as well. I think Wharton really wants to know, and Kellogg, and this isn't necessarily unique to Tuck's question. I don't think that if you can't get there, and frankly, Hanover is not the easiest place to get to from everywhere. Remember, they do a tour through the U.S., and they go to major cities in a lot of different states. So look and see if they're coming somewhere near you. Maybe you live in the suburb of Chicago. Well, they actually just went to Chicago. Look and see if they're coming, because at these presentations that they give, or these receptions, they're done by an admissions officer, so you get to actually meet a decision maker, and there's usually a panel of alumni. So you get to talk to a lot of people who have been through the program and really gain a lot of perspective. So that's a great way, one, is to try and attend one of these. If you can't, I know that they often do some of the MBA World Tour stuff to see if they're going to be at a tour that's coming near you, because those, again, are sort of international as well. They're in Europe and Asia, and so look at that. And if, frankly, you can't do that either, this is where it's on you, right? I mean, buy our guide and learn more about it. And get online and look at the leaders of the clubs and email them and try and engage in conversations with them. Seek out alums in your company or, in a company that you want to go and work for. Do your research, right? Don't just sit there and say, oh, I live far away, so you have to accept the fact that I don't have a lot of information. That's really not acceptable in this day and age when there's so many different ways to communicate, like we are right now, for instance, right? So really, it is on you to figure this out and try and make connections, but there's so many ways to do that.
Great. So I think we have time for one last question. And this question comes from Christina on Facebook. So bringing it back to our essays discussion. Is it okay to talk about stories from college if your career started in college so I can show commitment? And I think this might be applicable particularly for people who are younger applicants who want to maybe demonstrate some sort of career commitment even before they even graduated. Any thoughts on this?
So I think I have two answers. The first is, in general, talking about things in college I tend to advise against, because I think that it's very fair to say that what you did in college isn't necessarily what you do today and who you are today and the things that you're doing today. While, yes, you may have learned a lot of those skills in college, they want to know about the you right now, right? In particular, why you're ready for business school right now, not why you were ready for business school, but you're giving me an example from 4 years ago when you were a junior, right? So I think that that's really important. However, it sounds like this particular person has sort of an entrepreneurial job where they perhaps started it when they were in school and it's still going, and they're kind of reaching this point where they need the extra sort of help, right? Maybe to fill in the gaps in order to take their company to the next level. Well, absolutely. If you started this company in college, then it's absolutely relevant. I wouldn't think it's fair to say that you dismiss, a year or two worth of effort just because, frankly, you hadn't graduated yet. I think that shows a lot of initiative. I think that it's important, though, when you're talking about that, for instance, in your career goals essay, remember, it's a career goals essay. It's not a what have you done to date essay. While yes, you need to balance it out a little bit with what you've done, I wouldn't dwell on what you did when you were a junior or senior in college as much as what you're doing now, because that's obviously what's most relevant, right? This is where I am now, and this is where I'm stuck, and this is why I need an MBA, and this is where I need help. So I guess my point is, if you're going to talk about college, try not to do so too much, and the majority is really who you are now. I think it's fair to say you started your company back then, but this is where your company is today, this is where you are today, this is your skill set today, this is why you need to build your toolkit, right? But in general, if it's a non-work related essay, I really truly caution you against writing about college examples, because I really think that I'm a very different person today than I was when I was 22, and I think that most people are. And so I think that it's a big risk writing about things in college that aren't professional.
Stacy Euler is an MBA admissions expert with ClearAdmit, as well as a former assistant admissions director with the Tuck School of Business. We have just had a great hour with her as she had walked us through a presentation breaking down each of the essays for this year's Tuck MBA application. And she has also spent a lot of time to follow to answer your questions live. So Stacy, just wanted to thank you on behalf of our community and myself for joining us today and presenting on Tuck.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. So just in case we didn't get to your questions, I just want to point out that we do have two options for you in terms of getting your questions answered. So you can first go to ClearAdmit. Stacy actually had provided many great examples and resources to go to on the ClearAdmit website to get some more application advice and tips for yourself. ClearAdmit also has, I think, one of the best admissions blogs in the industry. Just check it out. It's blog.clearadmit.com, I believe. Lots of great information. Highly encourage you guys to add that to your RSS reader. So reach out to ClearAdmit. They're very friendly and professional and have amazing pedigree consultants, and you're sure to find someone who can help you and perhaps set up a consultation for you. Another option is Stacy, actually. Username is Stacy, Stacey, is a very active forum contributor in the Ask ClearAdmit forum in the Beat the GMAT community. So if you have some other questions, please ask in the Ask ClearAdmit section, and Stacy or one of her colleagues will very likely respond to it with a great response. So that being said, today's Tuck presentation was actually the last edition of this Write Like an Expert series. So for more information and seeing some of the past series, you can visit beatthegmats.com, and we're going to set up a link so you can view all the other past sessions. And we hope to do this again in the future with experts like Stacy. So thanks very much for watching Beat the GMAT community, and have a great remaining week.